At 12:17 a.m. on New Year's Day, police received a call that didn't sound panicked. But it should have a husband had just discovered the truth hidden inside his own home. What began as a celebration ended in exposure, betrayal, and a secret relationship no one was supposed to find. But the most disturbing part, the truth didn't end the night. It rewrote every life involved. At 12:17 a.m. On January 1, 2019, the Emergency Communications Center logged a call that would later be replayed dozens of times in court. Outside, fireworks cracked across the winter sky, their echoes folding into distant laughter and music. Inside the house on Hawthorne Lane, the celebration had already ended. The male caller identified himself, provided his address, and then paused as if choosing every word carefully. His voice did not shake. It sounded controlled, almost rehearsed, but there was something hollow beneath it that dispatchers are trained to recognize. He said there had been an incident. He said he needed officers immediately. When asked if anyone was injured, there was another pause, longer this time. "Yes," he replied quietly. The dispatcher noted his tone as calm. What the report could not capture was the weight of the silence that followed, or the way his breathing changed as the reality of the moment settled in minutes earlier. The house had been filled with ordinary sounds. The television counting down the final seconds of the year, glasses clinking, the low hum of heat pushing against the cold. Now there was only stillness. The husband stood in the living room, phone pressed to his ear, staring down a hallway that felt longer than it ever had before. From where he stood, he could see the bedroom door partially open, light spilling across the carpet in a thin, accusing line. His wife was inside. The woman he had married 8 years earlier. The woman whose routines he knew better than his own. At this moment, she was no longer speaking. Whether by choice or circumstance, the records would later argue. For now, all that existed was the distance between them, measured not in steps but in decisions made long before this night. "I need you to stay on the line with me," the dispatcher said. The husband agreed. He answered questions automatically, giving times and details with mechanical precision. He described the layout of the house. He confirmed there were no children present. He said there were no weapons visible. Each answer sounded as if it had been filed away in his mind, labeled and stored. Even as something inside him, splintered dot from the bedroom, came no sound. The quiet pressed in, broken only by the muffled thud of fireworks outside and the dispatcher's steady voice. The husband did not move closer. He did not look away. His eyes remained fixed on the hallway, as though crossing it would make what he had seen undeniable in a way he was not ready to face. When officers were dispatched, he acknowledged it with a soft, "okay." The call log would later note his cooperation, his clarity. It would not note the way his free hand trembled, or how his thoughts kept circling back to a single question he could not yet voice. When did this begin? By the time the call ended, sirens were already cutting through the night air. The new year had arrived, marked not by resolutions or promises, but by a moment that could never be undone. Inside the house, 2 lives remained suspended in the aftermath of a discovery that would soon draw others into its gravity. What had happened at 12:17 a.m. was only the beginning, and the truth waiting behind that bedroom door was far more complicated than the call itself suggested. In the official record, this moment would be reduced to timestamps and statements. But for the man standing alone, time stretched painfully, pulling the past forward and pushing the future into uncertain, irreversible darkness ahead now. Before the sirens reached Hawthorne Lane, investigators would later note the husband had already retreated inward. His name appears plainly in the file, but what mattered more was the pattern of his life before that night. He was methodical, routine-driven, a man who believed stability was built through consistency. Friends described him as quiet, dependable, and slow to anger. He paid bills early, kept his promises, and avoided conflict whenever possible. In his own recollection, he would later say, "I believed trust was something you practiced daily." He did not check phones. He did not memorize passwords. Love, to him, meant allowing another person room to breathe without suspicion. That belief shaped his marriage from the beginning, and for years it seemed to work. He woke each morning at the same time, left coffee warming on the counter, and locked the door twice before driving to work. In the evenings, he listened more than he spoke. His wife filled the space with stories, plans, small frustrations. He absorbed them quietly, offering solutions only when asked. Their relationship by outward appearance functioned smoothly, almost predictably. The first inconsistencies were small enough to ignore. A delayed reply, a canceled errand, nights when she seemed distant, distracted by her phone before turning the screen face down. He noticed these moments, registered them, then dismissed them as stress or fatigue. Everyone carried private thoughts, he reasoned. Marriage did not require constant explanation. There were times he felt a brief tightening in his chest, a fleeting sense that something was misaligned. He would ask simple questions and accept simple answers. When she said she was tired, he believed her. When she said work had become demanding, he adjusted his schedule to help. Doubt felt disloyal, and he refused to indulge it. What he did not recognize was how trust can become a blindfold. His loyalty was absolute, not because she demanded it, but because he offered it freely. He measured love by endurance, by how much uncertainty one could carry without complaint. In doing so, he unknowingly taught himself to overlook warning signs that others might have confronted looking back. Investigators would map the timeline differently. They would isolate moments that now seemed obvious, decisions that begged further scrutiny. But at the time, the husband moved forward with confidence, believing his marriage was solid, unremarkable, safe. That certainty would later be used against him, both in whispered judgments and official questioning. For now, it remained intact, fragile but unbroken. As the sirens grew closer that night, his past choices stood silently behind him, shaping how he would be seen, how he would be judged, and how the story of his marriage would soon be retold as something far less ordinary. Those who knew the couple would later insist there were no visible cracks, no raised voices or public arguments to point toward collapse. The husband himself would struggle to reconcile that image with what followed. In interviews, he returned repeatedly to the same thought, that a life could look complete while quietly coming apart. He did not see himself as naive, only committed. The records show anniversaries celebrated, holidays shared, photographs smiling back at the camera. Each artifact reinforced the same conclusion. This was a marriage that appeared ordinary, even enviable. And it was that appearance, solid and convincing, that allowed everything else to remain hidden. Long before the call at 12:17 a.m., a story was already being written, one that depended on secrecy and silence to survive. The next chapter of this case begins there, in the version of their marriage everyone believed in, before the truth found a way to surface. It is within that illusion of normalcy that the investigation will soon turn its focus, examining how appearances, habits, and trust combine to create a perfect cover for betrayal waiting patiently beneath the surface, until everything finally broke apart forever. To the outside world, the marriage on Hawthorne Lane appeared balanced and warm. Neighbors recalled morning waves, shared packages, brief conversations about weather and work. Friends described dinners where laughter came easily and arguments never surfaced. Photographs from birthdays and holidays showed two people standing close, shoulders touching, smiling with convincing ease. Their routines reinforced the image. They hosted small gatherings, planned vacations months in advance, and spoke casually about renovations and future milestones. Text messages recovered later were polite, affectionate, and unremarkable. There were heart emojis, reminders to drive safely, notes about groceries. Nothing suggested urgency or conflict. If anything, the tone was steady, measured. Adult investigators would later say this was the most deceptive stage of the relationship. Stability, when consistent, can hide erosion. The husband's trust filled the spaces where questions might have lived. The wife, outwardly attentive, maintained the rhythms that kept suspicion away. Together, they moved through public life with practiced coordination, yet small absences had begun to accumulate. She lingered longer after errands. He noticed the way conversations ended sooner than they used to, as if she were elsewhere already. When asked about her day, answers came complete but brief. He accepted them without pressing, believing privacy was a form of respect. At night, the distance was quieter. Phones stayed closer. She turned slightly away before falling asleep. None of it registered as betrayal, only change. People evolve, he told himself. Marriages adjust. He focused on consistency, on showing up, on being present even when presence felt one-sided. Friends noticed nothing unusual. If anything, They admired the calm of the relationship. In a world of visible dysfunction, this marriage seemed untouched. That perception became a shield. It discouraged deeper observation and rewarded surface harmony. No one questioned what appeared to work. The wife continued to play her role convincingly. She asked about his schedule, remembered appointments, laughed at familiar jokes. But emotionally, a thin separation had formed, almost imperceptible. It was not cruelty or anger, only withdrawal. A quiet reallocation of attention that went unnamed. Old messages reveal moments that now feel telling. Pauses where replies once came quickly. Conversations that ended without resolution. Plans postponed without explanation. At the time, they felt insignificant. In retrospect, they read like early warning signs written in invisible ink. There were no accusations during this period, no confrontations or raised voices. Silence replaced inquiry. Absence replaced intimacy. The marriage did not fracture suddenly. It thinned. Each day, the difference between appearance and reality widened just enough to remain unnoticed. By the time the new year approached, the illusion had hardened into accepted truth. To everyone watching, this was a marriage that worked. To the man inside it, it was a commitment worth protecting. To the woman, it had become something else entirely, something hidden beneath routine behind closed doors. The rhythm shifted further. Weekends filled with separate plans disguised as obligations. A walk taken alone. A drive extended for no clear reason. He sensed the change without naming it, filing the feeling away for later. She offered reassurance in gestures rather than closeness, maintaining calm while retreating emotionally. Nothing here violated trust outright. That was the danger. Each choice existed in gray space, defensible, forgettable. Together, these moments formed a pattern that only becomes visible when viewed backward. After damage is done, and memory sharpens into questions. By then, explanations sound reasonable, and responsibility blurs, allowing everyone to insist nothing obvious was ever wrong until consequences arrive without warning and refuse to be ignored. It was only after the image of the perfect marriage had been established that another figure quietly entered the narrative. He did not arrive with drama or disruption. In fact, most people barely noticed him at all. A younger man, seen occasionally in passing, standing near the end of a driveway or crossing the street at odd hours. To neighbors, he was anonymous, easily forgettable, part of the background movement of the neighborhood. Investigators would later describe him as incidental at first glance. He did not live in the house. He did not attend gatherings. His name did not appear in early interviews. Yet his presence surfaced repeatedly in small, disconnected observations that seemed meaningless on their own. A neighbor recalled seeing him outside more than once, always polite, always brief. Another mentioned a car parked down the block late at night, engine running, lights off. The wife never spoke of him directly. When his name eventually emerged in the records, it came fragmented, hidden within unrelated conversations and overlooked details. A casual mention of someone from nearby. A vague reference to a favor done, a ride offered. Nothing concrete enough to raise concern. The husband remained unaware. His days continued in their predictable rhythm, shaped by work and routine. He passed through the same spaces where the younger man had been without sensing intrusion. If they crossed paths, it was without recognition. One existed in the open, the other in concealment. There were moments, later reconstructed, where their proximity nearly intersected. A morning when the husband left early, and a figure was seen walking away minutes later. An evening when the wife returned home later than expected, explaining it away as traffic. Each moment slid past unnoticed, absorbed into the normal variability of life through observation alone. Investigators began to outline the younger man's role. He was attentive, available, and invisible by design. He spoke little, listened closely. When dialogue was eventually recovered, it appeared cautious, coded, short exchanges, questions without direct answers, emotional language restrained as if written to avoid detection. She said she needed space. One recovered message read. I said I understood. Another ended simply, be careful. These fragments meant nothing in isolation. Together, they suggested awareness of risk, an understanding that what existed between them was not meant to surface. The wife's behavior shifted subtly during this period. She guarded her phone more closely. She stepped outside to take calls. Her attention moved elsewhere, divided without explanation. To the husband, these changes registered only as distance, not deception. The younger man remained unnamed, undefined. His identity was secondary to his function. He represented something unspoken entering a closed system, altering its balance without triggering alarms. He did not demand recognition. He thrived on remaining peripheral. By the time investigators connected him definitively to the case, his presence no longer seemed accidental. It appeared deliberate, carefully managed. But at this stage, he was still a shadow, a suggestion rather than a certainty. The husband, still grounded in trust, did not look for threats he did not believe existed. He interpreted absence as stress, silence as normal fluctuation. The idea of a third presence had not yet formed in his mind. That realization would come later, violently and without warning. For now, the story holds him at a distance from the truth. The younger man remains in the margins, his role undefined but growing. The next phase of the investigation will move away from physical sightings and toward something far more revealing. What had been hidden in plain sight would soon begin to surface through records, devices, and words that were never meant to be seen. Once investigators shifted from observation to evidence, the shape of the truth began to change. Phones were collected, devices logged, data preserved. What had been invisible in daily life became traceable under forensic review. Deleted messages do not vanish completely, and encrypted applications leave behind patterns even when their contents are hidden. The digital record told a story no one had intended to share. The wife's phone revealed gaps that immediately drew attention. Hours with no activity, followed by brief bursts of communication late at night. Call logs showed repeated contact with the same number, often after midnight, sometimes lasting only seconds. Investigators noted how the timing aligned with moments. The husband was known to be asleep, or aware recovered text fragments were incomplete but revealing. Words surfaced without context, emotional without explanation. "I miss you. We can't keep doing this. Not tonight." Each message suggested intimacy managed carefully around risk. When full conversations could not be restored, patterns filled the silence. Frequency mattered more than content. Encrypted applications told a similar story. Accounts created, then deleted. Passwords changed regularly, notifications disabled. The behavior was deliberate, designed to avoid discovery rather than confrontation. The wife had separated parts of her life into compartments, each sealed from the other. One for marriage, one for secrecy. In later interviews, she would insist there was confusion, that nothing physical had happened for some time. But the messages contradicted her timeline. They showed planning, reassurance, emotional dependency. She had offered different versions of herself to different people, adjusting tone and vulnerability depending on who was listening. Minimal dialogue emerged from voice notes recovered on backup storage. Short recordings whispered cautious. "I can't talk long," she said in one. In another, "You have to trust me." These fragments were never meant to be permanent. Yet here they were, stripped of privacy, replayed under fluorescent lights. Investigators noted how language shifted depending on the recipient. With her husband, communication was practical, affectionate, but routine. With the younger man, it was tentative, charged, uncertain. She managed both relationships by controlling access, feeding each just enough to sustain it. The manipulation was not overt. There were no threats, no dramatic ultimatums. Instead, there was reassurance, delay, ambiguity. She framed herself as conflicted, overwhelmed, trapped between responsibilities. This allowed her to maintain sympathy while avoiding resolution. Late-night calls became a focal point. They often ended abruptly, sometimes without connection. Missed calls followed by silence. The pattern suggested caution, fear of being overheard. The husband never questioned these anomalies. He slept through them, unaware his absence created opportunity. When investigators overlaid digital activity with physical movement, the picture sharpened. Messages sent when she stepped outside. Calls made during short drives. Time was being carved out deliberately, stolen from shared life and given elsewhere. None of this existed in isolation. Each message, each call, reinforced a structure built on concealment. The wife had learned to live in fragments, to keep stories straight, to erase traces quickly. For a time it worked. What remained striking was how ordinary everything looked on the surface. There were no explosive arguments captured, no explicit declarations. Just persistence, just secrecy. Just a relationship that should not have existed, maintained through discipline and omission. By the time the digital reconstruction was complete, investigators no longer asked whether something inappropriate had occurred. They asked how long it had been sustained and at what cost. The evidence suggested intention rather than accident, choice rather than impulse. The evening of December 31st began without urgency, shaped by routine rather than suspicion. Preparations moved calmly through the house, coats placed aside, food arranged, glasses set out with practiced familiarity. Outside, snow reflected streetlights, and neighbors drifted toward celebrations elsewhere. Inside, the husband noted nothing unusual, only the comfortable predictability of another shared holiday. Investigators would later reconstruct these early hours as deceptively quiet, the last stretch of time before momentum shifted. Everything appeared normal, and that normalcy would later become one of the most unsettling elements of the night, according to every statement collected afterward by police. As evening progressed, guests arrived briefly, then left, leaving behind the echo of conversation and music. Alcohol softened edges, lowered voices blurred time. The wife moved easily through the space, smiling, attentive, her phone never far from reach. The husband watched without concern, telling himself this was celebration, nothing more. From his perspective, everything felt slightly off, like a familiar room rearranged. I remember thinking she seemed distracted, he would later recall, but I told myself I was imagining it. The feeling passed quickly, buried beneath laughter, noise, and habit as the countdown toward midnight quietly advanced around them together. By 9 p.m., the house had grown quieter. Television volume increased as background noise, filling spaces where conversation thinned. The wife stepped outside once, then twice, citing fresh air. The husband noticed but remained seated, scrolling absently, trusting her explanation. Fireworks tested early across the neighborhood, sharp and distant. Each small moment seemed harmless, yet investigators later marked these intervals carefully. Time stamps, movement, and absence aligned into a pattern that only became visible after the fact. Once digital records replaced memory and silence lost its protection entirely under scrutiny the following morning by investigators later assigned to case file. As midnight approached, tension gathered without announcement. Music swelled, glasses refilled, voices rose. The husband stood near the doorway, watching his wife speak to someone across the room, her laughter arriving a beat late. He could not hear the words, only sense the distance. I felt suddenly unnecessary, he would think, a fleeting emotion he dismissed immediately. The countdown began, numbers shouted, hands raised. In that noise, something fragile cracked quietly, unheard. No accusation formed, only a pressure behind his eyes and chest that he ignored while smiling for everyone else present in the room as midnight arrived officially then. When the clock struck 12, celebration erupted on cue. Kisses exchanged, glasses clinked, strangers embraced. The wife leaned in, offered a brief smile, then stepped away again. Fireworks drowned thought, and alcohol softened reaction. The husband registered the absence instinctively. I told myself it meant nothing, he would later say, that every relationship had moments like this. The rationalization settled quickly, reinforced by habit. Midnight passed, and with it, the last easy chance for denial slipped quietly into memory without resistance from either of them as the night continued forward, unchecked toward consequences no one yet named or understood fully after midnight. Guests thinned, coats reclaimed, doors closing softly. The house settled into an uneasy calm. The wife moved with purpose, checking time, scanning space. The husband felt something tighten, a quiet alarm he could not explain. I should have asked then, he would later admit. Instead, he waited, trusting the night to resolve itself. It would not. Within the next hour, proximity would replace distance, and secrecy would collide with inevitability, carrying everyone toward the locked room that ended everything before police lights and sirens erased all remaining uncertainty from their lives forever, and began the investigation officially recorded. The cold air hit him first, sharp and biting, as he stepped from the car into the driveway. The streets were quiet now, the fireworks faded to distant pops, leaving only the low hum of electricity in the neighborhood lights. He unlocked the door with habitual precision, the key turning smoothly, but something felt off. A small instinct flickered, the kind that had been easy to dismiss in the past. Noticing it now made his chest tighten. He moved into the hallway, shedding coat and gloves with mechanical efficiency, eyes scanning for the familiar arrangement of furniture, the faint smell of dinner lingering on the air. The house should have been empty. Guests had left, celebration was over, yet a light glowed under the bedroom door. It should have been dark. That tiny anomaly drew him forward. Every step felt heavier than the last, though he could not explain why. The moment he reached the door, he paused, hand on the knob. The light inside flickered slightly, casting an unnatural glow across the carpet. He could hear something faint, movement, a chair scraping against the floor, the rustle of fabric. His breath caught. I should call out, he thought, but the words never formed. The room became a pressure chamber, closing in, amplifying every small sound, every shifted shadow. He tried the handle. Locked. A jolt of confusion, then frustration, surged. The door should have been open. He knew this house, its locks, its rhythms. A locked door at this hour was impossible, unplanned. And yet it was locked. Heart racing, he pressed his ear against it. A faint whisper, or maybe the creak of the mattress, barely perceptible over the thrum of his own pulse. I told myself it was nothing, he later recalled, yet every instinct screamed otherwise. The air smelled different, unfamiliar, tinged with something he could not identify. His fingers drummed nervously against the doorframe, tracing the edges like a compass, seeking answers in wood and shadow. His mind raced, piecing together the small oddities from the evening. The late calls, the unexplained steps outside, the subtle distance in her eyes. They converged into one unbearable certainty. He was not yet ready to name. The hallway around him seemed narrower now, walls pressing closer. Light from the living room cut across the floor, creating long, sharp rectangles that pointed directly at the door. Time slowed. Each sound, each flicker of the bulb, each whispered echo from behind the barrier seemed magnified. He wanted to step back, retreat into the safety of routine, but something demanded confrontation, a force he could not resist. He tried the knob again. Still locked. The sound from within, the movement, the faint whisper, intensified slightly, as if aware of his hesitation. Panic threatened to take over, but he held it at bay, clinging to rationality while the rational explanation dissolved beneath him. His own heartbeat became a drumbeat, a metronome counting the seconds until inevitability. He leaned closer to the door, pressing his forehead against the cool wood. The light from inside seemed to pulse, teasing him with hints of what lay beyond. Shadows shifted just out of view. He imagined shapes, voices, evidence of the unknown. And then he froze, realizing that the line between what he suspected and what he feared had vanished entirely. This was the moment before revelation. The room, the locked door, the light, everything coalesced into a singular, suffocating tension. The truth lay on the other side, seconds away, and yet impossibly distant. Every prior night, every dismissed warning, every small sign of absence led here, compressing years of trust and ignorance into one unbearable threshold. He took a deep breath, the weight of anticipation pressing down on his chest, and turned the knob. The door gave way with a soft click, a sound that seemed far louder than it should have been in the quiet house. Light spilled across the hallway, and his eyes fell on a scene that would replay in his mind for years. The unmistakable presence of another man, seated where he should have been alone with her. Michael? His voice was steady at first, betraying nothing, but the syllable hung heavy in the air. The younger man looked up, startled, caught in a frozen moment. His calm demeanor cracked, revealing the fear that had been hiding behind practiced restraint. I didn't, he began, voice faltering. The wife turned toward him, eyes wide, hands trembling. It's not what it looks like, she stammered, the lie slipping from her mouth before she could catch it. Her gaze flicked between the two men, panic rising. Please, just, not what it looks like. The husband's words were quieter now, sharper in their precision, each syllable slicing through the tension. Calm, methodical, but cold. The anger he had managed to suppress for hours, or perhaps decades, shifted into something harder, something deliberate. Explain it to me. Now he stepped fully into the room, his eyes tracing the evidence he had refused to see. The younger man rose, hands raised slightly, pleading without words. We never meant. Never meant. The husband's laugh was low, humorless. It rattled through the space, echoing off walls and over furniture, empty of warmth. Do you have any idea how long this has been going on? His voice grew louder, controlled rage simmering beneath the surface. How much of my life you've been stealing without a sound? The wife's face paled. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she said, desperation breaking through carefully maintained composure. I didn't plan for it to. Her voice trailed off, suffocated by the weight of exposure. The younger man shook his head rapidly, his own panic mounting. We didn't mean to hurt anyone, he said, voice cracking. It just... enough. The husband's voice was now sharp, commanding, final. Silence fell, interrupted only by the faint hum of electricity and distant residual fireworks outside. He stood rigid, eyes hard, scanning each detail of the room. The misplaced phone, the jacket slung carelessly over a chair, the subtle shift in body language that confirmed what he had only suspected. Everything aligned. Nothing was deniable anymore. I trusted you, he said finally, low and steady. Both of you. The words carried more weight than any shout could. And you betrayed me. Not just me, everyone who ever believed in this life. The wife sank back against the bed, hands covering her face, unable to meet his gaze. Tears ran down her cheeks, hot and unrelenting. Confession had not freed her. It had bound her to the gravity of her actions. The younger man remained standing, cornered by truth and emotion. A participant in something he had underestimated. Dialogue gave way to silence as the implications settled. The husband's controlled calm, maintained for so long, fractured, replaced by a measured coldness. He spoke less now, moving methodically, observing, cataloging, internalizing every detail. Each breath, each gesture, each broken sentence from the two people he had loved and trusted became part of the evidence in his mind. Power shifted instantly. The illusion of balance had collapsed, leaving a triangle of vulnerability, anger, and regret. Neither of the other two could reclaim the space they had occupied emotionally or physically. The husband's presence dominated, not through violence, but through the clarity of revelation and the inevitability of consequence. The first officers on the scene entered cautiously, aware from dispatch that the situation was volatile but unclear. The hallway smelled faintly of smoke from extinguished fireworks, mingling with the colder scent of the night air that had seeped in through open doors. The husband met them in the living room, composed outwardly, but his hands betrayed a subtle tremor. He explained the situation in precise, measured sentences, narrating the events leading to discovery without emotion. Yet every pause, every clipped word carried the weight of shock. Body cam footage would later reveal the tension in small details. The way he adjusted his jacket, the stiffness in his shoulders, the deliberate avoidance of direct eye contact with his wife. The wife remained seated on the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face, voice shaking as she tried to offer explanations, each word fragmentary and contradictory. The younger man leaned against the wall, shoulders hunched, eyes darting between officers and the husband, repeating phrases that sounded rehearsed. I didn't mean for this. It just happened. I never wanted to hurt anyone. Interviews were taken separately as procedure dictated. The husband recounted his version with a careful chronology, returning home, noticing the locked door, the light, and the sounds. He described opening the door, seeing the two together, and his immediate responses. Each statement was consistent, stripped of embellishment, but underscored by a calmness that hinted at suppressed rage. The wife's statements diverged sharply. She minimized the involvement, cited miscommunication, claimed emotional confusion, and at times blamed circumstances rather than personal choice. Investigators recorded every word, noting inconsistencies in timing, location, and intent. Each contradiction added depth to the reconstruction, a web of deceit made tangible through careful questioning. The younger man's narrative was equally fragmented. Fear of reprisal and shame led him to shift blame subtly. He described brief encounters, conversations taken out of context, claiming coincidence where evidence suggested intent. His tone was nervous, defensive, but layered with hints of regret and recognition of wrongdoing. Psychological breakdowns became evident as officers moved through the scene. The wife's tears were intermittent, her sobs punctuated by quiet moments of detachment, staring at walls as if the room itself could answer questions she could not. The younger man's panic fluctuated between anger at himself and fear of repercussions. The husband, though composed outwardly, displayed rigid control, as though every breath and gesture had to assert authority and process betrayal simultaneously. Digital evidence supplemented oral testimony. Screenshots, call logs, and timestamps aligned with fragmented memories, confirming patterns previously denied. Investigators pieced together late-night calls, deleted messages, and inconsistencies in storylines, constructing a timeline that merged perception and reality. It became clear that the events were not isolated incidents, but part of a sustained, hidden interaction. The aftermath extended beyond the immediate scene. Neighbors and friends were interviewed, revealing their own confusion at small oddities they had dismissed. Late departures, brief absences, and minor inconsistencies that now appeared as warning signs. Everyone involved struggled to reconcile prior beliefs with the emerging truth. No violence had occurred beyond emotional harm, but the consequences were palpable. Relationships fractured irrevocably, trust dissolved, and the once orderly household was now a repository of conflicting stories, emotional rupture, and carefully preserved evidence. The focus remained on understanding the mechanics of deception, the weight of betrayal, and the human cost of secrets exposed. The courtroom was quiet, the kind of stillness that magnified every whisper, every shuffle of paper, every creak of the wooden benches. Media cameras lingered outside, but inside, the atmosphere was governed by procedure rather than spectacle. The husband sat rigid, watching as the layers of deception that had haunted him for months were laid bare under legal scrutiny. Each exhibit, each testimony, reinforced a narrative he had long suspected, but had never been able to confront so formally. The wife took the stand, her demeanor alternating between contrition and defensiveness. Lawyers guided her responses, probing the choices she had made, the calculated concealment, the digital evidence, the inconsistencies she had created. Investigators' findings, texts, call logs, encrypted app records were presented in sequence. Every detail, no matter how small, became a testament to her sustained manipulation. Her carefully compartmentalized life was dissected under bright lights and meticulous cross-examination. She was deliberate, the prosecutor said plainly, addressing the court. Every message, every late-night call, every act of concealment was a conscious decision. The evidence leaves no room for coincidence or misunderstanding. The words settled in the hushed room like a cold weight. Silence followed, punctuated only by the turning of pages, the occasional cough, the quiet inhale of the husband bracing himself against memories he could not unsee. The younger man, once a central figure in the unfolding drama, faded quickly from relevance. Testimony confirmed he had been reactive rather than controlling, guided by the choices and manipulations of the wife. His role, while significant emotionally, held little influence legally. Power, it became clear, resided with the one who orchestrated secrecy, who dictated the rhythms of deception, and who held both narratives, truth and lie. At her discretion, observers in the courtroom noted the subtle shifts in demeanor. The husband's restrained posture now carried a different weight. He did not raise his voice, did not gesture dramatically. The quiet authority of being the wronged, the betrayed, spoke louder than any argument. Each statement from his wife, each question from the attorneys, reinforced the scale of consequences that had been silently accruing over years of unnoticed choices. Justice, in this case, was methodical rather than loud. The judge, impartial and attentive, presided over proceedings with deliberate care. Every ruling, every evidentiary inclusion, every ruling on admissibility emphasized permanence over spectacle. The courtroom became a space where morality, legality, and consequence intersected, demonstrating that accountability did not require dramatics. It required patience, documentation, and reasoned judgment. The public judgment outside, filtered through media reports, captured fragments of the story. Betrayal, secrecy, exposure. But within the walls of the court, the focus was precise, clinical, and ultimately transformative. The silence of past inattention, the unasked questions, the ignored signals, the habitual trust, had yielded a cost far greater than any superficial spectacle could convey. By the conclusion of the proceedings, it was evident who had wielded influence, who had orchestrated concealment, and who had been left to navigate the fallout. Emotional and legal consequences intertwined, leaving the wife accountable, the younger man marginalized, and the husband the quiet witness to both truth and resolution. The house on Hawthorne Lane remained empty after the final gavel fell. Furniture stood in place, unchanged, yet every corner carried the echo of what had transpired. The husband returned one last time to gather personal effects, each item a reminder of ordinary life shattered. He moved slowly, deliberately, cataloging memories now intertwined with betrayal. Every photograph, every letter, every small token of affection reminded him that trust, once broken, leaves a permanent mark. Life outside the house carried on, indifferent to the devastation within. The husband resumed work, routines, and daily obligations, but the rhythm of his former existence had been irreversibly altered. He spoke little of that night, choosing instead to process internally, to recalibrate what he once believed about loyalty, love, and vulnerability. Even casual interactions reminded him that the world he had trusted to be consistent could conceal consequences he had never imagined. Friends and neighbors adjusted their perception as well. They had witnessed the seemingly perfect marriage, unaware of the undercurrents. Their curiosity, empathy, and gossip formed a backdrop to the husband's private reckoning. Some offered support, others recoiled from the discomfort of reality clashing with expectation. In each response, he found reflection, not always comforting, but necessary for understanding the depth of the damage inflicted. The wife's absence became a constant presence. Legal proceedings had concluded, but the emotional residue lingered. The younger man faded completely from relevance, returning to a life untouched by public scrutiny, but haunted privately by participation in acts beyond his moral readiness. In contrast, the husband carried both the knowledge and the burden of truth, walking through each day with awareness that some fractures never mend. Documentation and court records closed formally, yet the story persisted. Investigators' notes, digital evidence, and testimonies remained archived, a permanent record of deception, exposure, and consequence. These files, precise and unemotional, contrasted with the chaos left behind in the lives of those involved. The case became a study in how seemingly ordinary choices, ignored glances, unasked questions, habitual trust, can accumulate into irreversible outcomes. Reflection became central to the husband's understanding. Crimes of passion, of secrecy, and of betrayal rarely erupt spontaneously. They are cultivated through silence, manipulation, and avoidance. Every lie told, every omission preserved, created the conditions for exposure, and every decision to overlook, to rationalize, or to trust unquestioningly contributed to the eventual collapse. As the narrative closes, the husband walks through empty rooms one final time, feeling the weight of history pressing down silently. Nothing remains as it was. Relationships, expectations, and trust have been irrevocably altered. The case stands as a stark reminder that consequences begin long before the final act, embedded in patterns of choice and the quiet accumulation of secrets. The records end. The cameras stop rolling, but the lesson endures. Vigilance, honesty, and moral responsibility are the only defenses against the slow, insidious erosion of trust. After midnight, indeed, nothing is the same, and nothing ever will be. The story concludes by reminding viewers that betrayal doesn't arrive suddenly. It is built quietly through secrecy and manipulation. Truth always surfaces, and when it does, it carries consequences that no celebration, apology, or excuse can erase. Vigilance, honesty, and moral responsibility are not just personal virtues. They are safeguards against irreversible harm.